And welcome back, fourth and long fans. It's your footy correspondent, Coach Donnie Hess here, back with another episode in my Aussie supporter series. And today, ladies and gentlemen, I have Mr. Brian Arbuckle. Brian, how are you doing, sir?
Oh, very well. Thank you, Coach. Great to see you and meet you.
It is great to meet you, sir. We met through Twitter, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to sit down and have a nice talk about footy. But before we get into the footy talk, I like to kind of find out a little bit about the person I'm chatting with a little bit outside of the game of footy. So if you want, just give me a real quick bio of who you are.
Yeah, well, I'm West Australian bred, basically, and moved to Melbourne about 8 years ago, but grew up in Fremantle, or to be specific, because of rivalries, East Fremantle as opposed to South Fremantle. So we've got to keep that clear. So, yeah, obviously Fremantle's in my blood, and I've seen the city grow from a working container ship town sort of thing. America's Cup came along in the 80s, and money was spent, and Freo's just blossomed since. So it's definitely in my blood. Yeah, moved to Melbourne for a little bit of a lifestyle change, and it worked out perfectly because footy's so big, as you know, over here in Melbourne. So access to many games a weekend is a bonus. Where in Perth there's only one game a weekend, and it's very hard to get a walk-up ticket. So in Melbourne, being a neutral person from outside of Victoria, I can go to any game I like and not feel like I'm crowding anybody. So it's been good. And I love it over here. It's a very good footy town and great place. Except for the weather. Weather's better in Perth.
That's fantastic. I was going to say it's probably a little bit of a culture shock, a little bit with the change in weather compared to Perth, compared to Melbourne. So being a footy supporter, I got to ask, what's your favorite thing about the sport of football?
It's I've grown up with footy from when my dad, who sadly passed last year, we would go to the footy every home game back in the waffle days, way before AFL. So from about, I don't know, 5 or 6 I can remember, and it's just been this part of your life. It's sort of hard to describe. It's a community without the bad stuff of community. Like, everyone's got the same focus on footy, no matter what your colour is. It's all about uniting, and at the end of the day, we're all good mates, and the community's better for it. And it's just great to belong to something and feel like you can support it in 1,000 different ways, your team. So it's something really concrete into your lifestyle if you're into football that way.
I completely agree. Even being over here in the States, you fall in love with the sport. You fall in love with everything about it. It's the community, the rivalries, the tension, and all of that is absolutely fantastic. So I'm gonna ask here, can you remember your earliest footballing memory?
Yeah, well, going back to, as I say, when my dad used to take me to the football, we lived 2 streets away from East Fremantle's home ground. So every second Saturday, Mum would cook meat pies at home. We'd watch the Elvis Presley movie because it was like on every Saturday afternoon, and then we'd walk up to the football. Dad would disappear into the members area, and I would just run around the rest of the footy stadium or ground, mixing with a whole lot of other kids, kicking footies, watching the footy, and that was a routine for my childhood. So every home game, which was basically every second week, the same routine. Mum and cooked pies, Elvis movie, Dad and me off to the footy. He'd give me the 50 cents to go and get a bag of lollies or a Coke or something, and I'd come back and check in with him at quarter time, half time, and then meet him after the game, after my little adventures running around the place. So, and that's where, the love of footy started.
Fantastic. Now, the people that are watching the YouTube video, they kind of already know, but I got to ask for the podcast people, what's your club and why is it that you support them?
Fremantle, but it's everything. Well, we were Fremantle football savages, I guess. I was East Fremantle, and you're either East Fremantle or South Fremantle. Now, newcomers to AFL will know rivalries like West Coast Fremantle and the Sydney teams, and Essendon and Collingwood. But back before AFL, when Waffle was equally strong competition, the derbies, East versus South Fremantle, that was a rivalry no one can really understand unless you were there. And I guess the best example of that, and it is on YouTube, the 1979 grand final between East and South Fremantle. It was as passionate as it gets. That was my first grand final, and I was sitting right on the fence behind the goals with all my East Fremantle kids, my friends. And then after half time, a big blue broke out. It was fierce. That was the rivalry. It was raw then, because there was punching and all that stuff that's not picked up on. There was no video cameras to get reported like they are now, and it was serious rivalry. And yeah, that's just passion, and that's what led me into Fremantle, and that's where the South and East Fremantle people have sort of come together to support one Fremantle team, but there's still that. So you're a South Fremantle or you're an East Fremantle sort of person, but together, and being south of the river, that's also the other divide in WA, because north of the river is basically West Coast, and south of the river is generally known as Freo, although people will cross the boundaries, but there's lines drawn.
That's fantastic. And you said your family is primarily, I mean, I know that there's the massive rivalry between the two. Has there been anybody in the family that's found their way to supporting a different club, maybe even West Coast? I mean, I know that can be fighting words for some people.
Well, truth be told, before Fremantle, as West Australians, we did follow West Coast. But if you're a Fremantle person, you got your own team. But one of my brothers, going back earlier, we were all East Fremantle supporters in the family, but his godfather was a South Fremantle supporter. So he became the black sheep of the family, the only South Fremantle person. And South Fremantle is also red and white. I don't know if you know that. Very much
I did hear that.
Yeah, so which my dad is actually a Swans, South Melbourne fan, or what? Yeah, was. But yeah, my middle brother here, he switched just because his godfather was South Fremantle. So he was the black sheep of the family in that point. But otherwise, we were all in the family Freo people. Mum was Essendon growing up as a girl because they're from Victoria. But again, came to join Fremantle, and because that's where we lived.
That's to each their own. Everybody has a different way of finding their club. I absolutely love it. So let's go back a little bit. Can you remember the first Fremantle item that you ever were given or bought?
Well, I was working in a sports shop from mid-80s, mid-80s for about 15 years. So when we got our merchandise gear, that's where I bought my first fan gear. I bought the first thing I really bought that was of significance was a match-worn jumper by Stephen O'Reilly, our fullback, from '95. One of the first jumpers I bought it at an auction and signed. That was my first step into something for me and about the club and started the culture from that sort of thing. But I used to buy a lot of stuff through the work, polos and shorts and jumpers and stuff. So that was my first ribbon.
That's fantastic. And you always got to support, like, not always easy for me over here in the States to get a hold of Sydney stuff. You gotta pay for it. You gotta hope that you can get through the right ways. So that's awesome that you were able to get a hold of that stuff. So I'm one of those, again, I've stated it to many people that watch this, that I'm a diehard. I wake up early to watch the games but I like hearing people describe their fandom, because nobody fans the same way. Nobody supports the same way. So is there any way you could describe to me how your passion or your fandom for the Fremantle Footy Club?
While I was living in Perth, basically went to every game, and for the last few years before I moved, I was 200 kilometres south of Perth. So I do a 400k round trip for every home game, which I think is about 250 miles in your language.
Around that, it's close.
Yeah, all, and that's in a day. So a couple of hours driving, 4 hours at the footy, and then a couple of hours home. Now, obviously in Melbourne, we don't get a lot of games in Melbourne, so it's a lot of TV watching. I'm a nervous watcher. Unless we're 15 goals up in the last quarter, I'm never comfortable. And I would be a terrible coach, I think, because I couldn't make the hard calls on players, because I always try and find the good things in the players, even when they're not playing well. So I'm a very nervous watcher, and sometimes I think I'm jinxing my team by watching. So it's only when it's over that I take a breath and go, oh, thank God for that. So, but yeah, it's right.
I know the feeling. You are not the first person that I've ever heard that said that. It's like, unless we're 15 goals up, I'm not comfortable. That's awesome. And I appreciate that, because there is so much passion to it. And I appreciate that. I know for me, sometimes you do take a deep breath when you're 2 goals up and there's 6 minutes left. You're like, oh my God, is this going to be close? So it's kind of fun, but it keeps you alive, in my personal opinion.
Oh
It keeps
yeah,
you alive.
yeah.
So I'm one of those. Unfortunately, now that you're back in Melbourne, I know that you started off in Freo. Can you remember the first ever Freo game that you attended? I know Freo is a relatively newer side. What was the first Freo game that you attended?
Well, I was talking to my mate about this the other day, and we couldn't remember our first home game, because our first game we ever played was actually in Melbourne against Richmond. And I'm a harbour master, which is a foundation member of Fremantle, and they organised a function at the Fremantle jail, which was turned into a tourist destination type of thing. So they had a big screen for us members to go in. That was the first game I remember actually watching, even though it was an away one, and being in Fremantle jail, which is like 150 years old or something, real Fremantle heritage. And that's the one I remember mostly, even though we lost it, but it was our first game, first time we could wear our colours, and you know, we had arrived, and we've gone on ever since.
Fantastic. And it's great to find people that are foundation members. Like you're not the first one. I have another, my GWS fan that I'm going to chat with is also a foundation member. So it's really cool to have that connection. I mean, you have this little piece of history that not everybody has, especially with some of the older clubs in Melbourne that are 150 years old. Those foundation members, unfortunately, they're no longer here, sadly
Yeah.
to say. So I know this is never an easy question for some people, because it's almost like choosing your favorite child. Do you have a favorite player of the past, and do you have a favorite player currently on the Dockers list?
I've heard you ask this question to a couple of the other ones. It's a tricky one. It's seeing the players from day one when we were new, and they were giving everything into a new competition, a new team. But it's pretty hard to go past like this guy here, Matthew Pavlich.
Pavlich.
He's basically one of the. I mean, he could have left our club a lot of times and gone back home to South Australia, but he stuck it out 360 games, and despite not winning a flag, but he stuck with us, and for that alone, I admire him as one of our greats. Current day. Well, we all know how good Nat Fyfe is, but there's a lot of the young kids. I'm seeing some really good signs and progression in there. So the current crop, I don't have a favourite. They're all sort of a favourite, making the team quite a favourite rather than singling one out. David Mundy's probably the other guy whose longevity's been amazing. But I have to throw that in because my mate Juddy loves him to bits. So, yeah. But
Yeah, you got to tip your cap to Mundy to continue to play all these years and so many games under his belt. I respect him, and the fact that he got so many votes this last year in the Brownlow. Like, I tip my hat to him. Keep playing, Dave Mundy. It's incredible to keep him playing. I hope he can get to 400. I really do. That'd be
yeah,
fantastic if he could. We'll have to see if his body holds up, but he's a heck of a footballer, and he was a joy to watch in those Freo games. So I know, again, it hasn't been a long time for the Freo history, and unfortunately haven't had the taste of a flag yet. I'm hoping very soon for you. What's your most memorable moment as a Freo Docker supporter?
well, when I moved to Melbourne, it was the end of 2012, and 2013 was when we made our first grand final. So that was quite a memorable thing, even though we didn't get the job quite done on at the time. But being a Fremantle supporter, now living in Melbourne, the grand final was here. Seeing the Purple Army travel across the Nullarbor, meeting up at Federation Square, it was such a magical day. But one of the things that was really cool about that day is talking to retailers and pub owners and cafe people. They love the Fremantle supporters that come over. They said we, as a unit, polite, thankful, grateful, and really showed Fremantle in its best light, which was a big thing for business owners to say, your members are really cool, that they're the nicest people. There was no arrogance about us. So that was a magical day. And then as a single game, I'll probably beating Richmond and Collingwood with the last kick in both of those games 2 years in a row. And again, if you're an interstate supporter in Melbourne, you're in the minority at the ground, but all of a sudden you sound like the loudest part of the ground because the Victorians don't like it too much when you beat them, especially with a kick after the siren. But they were two really good days. It was almost like winning a grand final.
Fantastic. Darn you, Hawthorn. You had to ruin such a great moment. It's so fantastic. And the fact that Freo keeps finding a way to win games after the siren, especially at the MCG, is fantastic. I always get a kick out of those games, especially when you beat a Collingwood team that nobody expected you to beat. So those are really, really good moments. So I hate these ones here when I talk to some of these people, because I know last year wasn't the greatest season in the world, and my heart goes out to you, sir. You had to be one of the most snake bitten teams in the entire competition last year. So really quickly, I mean, injuries aside, what were your thoughts on last year? I mean, did you see the positive signs with this young group kind of growing up together and Dave Mundy having a season like no other for a while? Or was it kind of disappointing because there were some people talking Freo potentially as the finals team?
No, I think it was quite a good solid year. I'm probably the most optimistic I've been about a squad for a while. Like you go through the phases every 5 years. You go, oh, we've got a good nucleus here, but this one feels a little bit different again. There's some really good quality kids in there. Justin Longmuir, who's a Fremantle player, is back at the helm, so that feels right as well. There's a lot of good stuff being done off field with community stuff. So the club itself feels really good, but the nucleus of the kids, well, they're not really kids, but our young players, they all look good. We just need they need a bit of luck with injury so they can get consecutive games in, because they'll play 2 games, do a hammy or something, and the progression gets stalled. And that's for all players and all clubs. I mean, you've got to have a little bit of luck with the injury thing, and hopefully we're getting through our bad luck and get some consistent games into these guys. So.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, if I honestly believed going into this year, if you didn't have the injury issues you had, I think Freo was a finals team. Legit. They played such a great style of footy, good defensively. They got their youngsters going. And I'm not even going to lie to you. Everybody talks about Grundy. Everybody's going to talk to you about Gone. Darcy is one heck of a ruck. I'm not even going to lie. That guy was so much fun to watch. For a guy with his size to be able to have the stamina, conditioning, and then still the ability to do what he does at the size he is, that's incredible. So you guys re-signing him, that was a great bit of business for you. It stinks losing Chera, but I think Freo had a really good offseason. Kind of what were your thoughts on their offseason? Are you excited? Yes, you lose Chera, but you've got some really good talent coming in to the purple and white this year.
Yeah, the re-signing is definitely good. Chera, it's sad to see him go, but I think we've got enough. We're building depth that we can cover for players like that. The draft and this sort of trading thing, I'd take a little bit of notice of it, but I sort of wait to see, once everything settles down, we see some form, some training, and we'll look at it next year when the season starts. We'll see who's in line to have a crack at it. But I try not to get too sucked into all the media frenzy in Melbourne on breaking news stories and who's going here and there. It's like does my head in sometimes. So I try to steer clear of the rumours of media footy, but so I just watch, see what happens. We've got some good picks coming up. We've got some high numbers or some early picks. So there's a lot of young guys around, and our WA kids might feature pretty heavily in this draft because they've been able to play quite a bit of footy over the last 2 years. With Victorian footballers haven't because of lockdown. You know, the young kids have missed whole seasons in some cases. So I think there's a lot of talk coming out of WA of our young guys, which will be good to see.
And that'll be good too. And the best part is your teams will have that great look on that. So you're going to have some nice. It'll be fun. It'll be a fun draft period for sure. So I'm never one to say expectations because sometimes I think it sometimes comes as a negative connotation. Like you expect them to do something. And again, the season is a crapshoot. You never know. Injuries last year can ruin teams. So what are your thoughts going into this year? Do you have expectations? Are you always kind of that optimist? I think we'll have a good year, but I don't want to say finals. I don't want to say top four. I want to say good season.
No, well, as you said, like this year, we had the potential to probably make the 8, but things didn't go right, or we had a bad day when we shouldn't have. But I think all things being equal, next year I'd be aiming for the 8. And remember, Justin Longmuir, like his first season last year, it was all lockdown and based on the East Coast. So he's going to have a full-time job back in Perth as per normal. So he'll feel better for that. But I'm thinking top 8 to narrow it down to top 4, top 2 stuff. That'll take care of itself. You can't win a flag unless you're in the 8 to start with or play final. So, having said that, every other team's going to have a crack at it too, and it's going to be tight. It's going to be another tight season, I think, like this year. It's just going to be who can stand up on the day at the end of it. But yeah, I'm pretty happy that we might make it. So we just got to get it right.
It'll be fun. As I've said in a couple episodes, I think there's 10 to 12 teams that could make the finals next year. I think the finals competition is going to be insane because Yorma, Melbourne, Western, Sydney, GWS, Carlton, keep an eye on them. Richmond could be interesting with Dusty coming back and all their draft picks. I mean, it is scary. Geelong's going to be there. How does West Coast do? I know the evil twin, the evil other side of Perth, but I'm very fascinated on next year. Like I can't wait for next season to come up already. Yeah. So I know you've listened to the episodes. You've heard this question, but I love this question because I think it's a lot of fun. I'm going to install you as the list manager of the Freo Footy Club as we speak. The other 17 clubs are completely open. You can get any player you want. Who's the first player that you want and why?
This has been a great question. I've gone through the list. I sort of can't go past Dusty. There is just something about him, like he's a solid guy. He can run, but what we need at Freo is that guy who can finish and kick the goals, because goal kicking is probably what really hurt us this year. And he would be the sort of guy, we don't need him to be in and under because we've got those guys, but he can run, go down forward, and he does kick the goals. So that's the sort of guy we'd sort of like.
That's a scary midfield. Think about that as having Fife and Dusty both either in the midfield or in forward. That's a scary combination there. Oh man. I'm very interested on this next one because being Perth born but living in Melbourne now, the last 2 seasons the grand final has not been on Victorian soil. It hasn't been in the MCG, been in the Gabba, and been in lovely Optus Stadium. But I've been fascinating to hear the change of thought process, even by Victorian media, on maybe the grand final should be a traveling grand final. It shouldn't just be at the MCG. So it makes me think, as a person that now lives in Melbourne, do you like MCG and needs to be tradition, or do you kind of like the talk now that maybe potentially you could see the grand final be a traveling grand final?
Well, I think Perth did an amazing job this year, and being that twilight nighttime sort of feel, I think that was the best presentation of a grand final. And I'm hoping they do a twilight back here in Melbourne, because there is something about nighttime football. I mean, we play a lot of nighttime football through the year, so it shouldn't be an issue. It's the capacity, I guess. 100,000 people at the G. There's 5 million people here in Melbourne. So even if you can't get into the grand final itself in Melbourne, it's the best place to be, going to every pub in Melbourne, because it feels like you're there anyway. Perth, because it's a limited population of, what, 2.5 million or something, I think the size of the stadium is about right at the moment, but we need to get more people into the stadium. So, yeah, I don't mind the once every 5 years idea. I think that's quite good, and it helps spread the game, provided you can get enough people into the grounds. And we've got to think about the Victorians who would want to travel as well, which is normally reverse when interstate is coming, but at least there's a better chance of getting a ticket. So, yeah, I don't mind, but yeah, I was very proud of my hometown, and that's a great stadium. If you ever get a chance to, when you get to Perth, go and have a look at it. They did it well. It's a beautiful spot.
Oh yeah, absolutely fantastic stadium. I have a few people that I've met through this podcast and others that live in Perth that have extended the offer. The fun part would be getting over to Perth. I know it's not cheap, but I want to. I really, really want to. If I need to take a month off to be able to travel Australia, I would love to do that. So, as I've said, I'm a huge AFLW supporter. I started doing AFLW reviews last year. I mean, for you, do you keep an eye on the AFLW? And if so, I mean, how proud are you, and how good have the Freo Docker ladies been?
Oh, yeah, definitely. This year, I really wound up the interest in the girls, and they had a really good year, but just faltered towards the end. But it was great. It was we've got some good talent there. I even bought 7 of their match worn jumpers this year from the girls, so really jumping in on the support side of that. But it's been good, and you've seen the steady increase in skill levels now that they're getting some attention, like as a club, with training and all the stuff that the guys have had for 100 years. They're getting all that treatment, and they're getting better. And the young girls are now got their pathway coming through junior footy, and so we're going to see that skill blossom even further once all the young kids who've been playing for a lot longer in junior levels start coming through. So it's going to be good. And you've got to treat it as its own competition and not compare it to a men's competition, which some of the naysayers try and compare it to. But it's their own game. Appreciate it for what it is, I think.
I 100% agree. In my favorite argument to the naysayers, I said, were you back in 1900 when the league was 7 years old, when the VFL was 100 years old? Trust me, the skill level was probably about the same. I don't think I'm jumping off too big a limb here. So calm down, people. As more and more of these girls are playing from 3, 4, and 5, like the boys have for so many years, I think the skill is going to get better and better and better. They're not going to have to need the intersport people, the basketballers, the rugby players. They're going to get footy girls that have played footy and footy only. So I'm super excited that the competition will go to fully 18, not this year, but next year. So my beloved Swans will join. I'm already a foundation member for the Swans girls team. I take very much pride in that I was able to secure that even over here in the States. So I'm super looking forward to it. The women's season should be absolutely fantastic. I cannot wait. And I'm hoping Freo gets a chance to win a flag this year, because I think they've got an incredible list on the ladies' side for sure. So I like to have a little bit of fun towards the end of this. Just fun question. So when you do go to the footy, what's your go-to food when you go to a game?
It's probably no surprise. The easiest thing is a meat pie, because you can have the pie in one hand and the beer in the other, and not have to worry about holding a burger together or something like that. And it's just easy, and that's pretty much as simple as it is.
That's not a bad thing. I've been told it's something that you got to do when you go to the footy. I'm going to when I get there for absolute sure. I'm not a big drinker, but I will definitely have a beer because it's the Aussie way. I got to do it. If you're in Australia, if you're in Sydney, you're in Melbourne, you got to do what the Aussies do. So I'm one of those. because I haven't had the shot to see it, I'm trying to get a little bit of a database on where the best place to watch a game is in the stadiums, the MCG, SCG. Where's your ideal place to go to watch the footy?
Oh, well, my membership, which I still have in Perth, I've kept that going even though I can't get there. We're between the 50-metre arc and the square on the wing, and about 8 rows back from the fences, slightly elevated but close enough to watch and hear the sounds. Here in Melbourne, me and my mate, we generally sit with the cheer squad behind the goals, strength in numbers of purple and stuff. But one thing I do recommend to everybody is, if you get a chance, is to watch at least one game from the fence level, that first row, and watch it from that angle, because on the TV, it's elevated camera angles. You go, why didn't he see him? There's space over there, and how did the ump miss the free kick? But when you're watching it at eye level, you can see, no wonder he couldn't see that guy over there, or the umpire missed that, because it's so busy. It's easy to criticise from an elevated viewing platform, but when you're watching it at ground level, I don't know how the players find each other half the time, but it's something I recommend, and it gives you greater understanding.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I have the same thing a little bit when I coach, is that sometimes when the ball's on the other side of the field, it's not always easy to see the different situations that some of the guys go through. So there is times they come into the group and I'm like, what did you see there? Because I want to know how they saw it. So yeah, I completely
Yeah,
agree. I want to do one on the ground level, even if I'm not a trash talker, so I'm not going to give any of the players a spray. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to sit there and enjoy the footy. If a footy comes near me, I'll make the catch and handball it correctly. So,
yeah,
our as I've said in several of the episodes, this is a channel that is primarily based out of the States, NFL, different things like that. But I always see there's the occasional American that will click on the video and take a look. So, in case an American has clicked on this and has watched this video and is very interested, could you give me just really quickly a quick pitch on why a US fan should be a Fremantle supporter?
uh, it's pretty easy for me to. It's culture. We've got 50 plus thousand members for a team that hasn't won any silverware. Um, and I alluded before, some of the stuff we're doing off field, like with Starlight Foundation, with seriously ill kids and things like that, and the community stuff. Our Indigenous programs are fantastic. I think we've got the record of 7 Indigenous players in one team at one time, which was also the theme of the jumper this year. So I think our culture, uh, as I say, we try. Everyone's given their all, and we haven't really won anything. So wait till we win that first flag, and then we get everyone else jumping on as well. But get in early, and you'll appreciate the passion.
And I completely agree. If you get a chance, and if you do not have a club, of Freo is a really good one, because I think they've got a list that could do it very, very soon if they can stay healthy. So the last question I ask in this chat is, I just love the answers, because you never know what you're going to get. Favorite game of footy that you've ever watched, whether it's Freo, whether it's somebody else, and then whether TV, doesn't matter. What's your favorite game of footy that you've ever seen?
I reckon it's when we went down to Geelong in 2013 and beat them in the final. Considering Geelong always want their games at home because they feel like they're ripped off if they've got to play in Melbourne. But no one gave us a chance to beat them on the home deck down there, and we did. That was probably one of the best games, and then that got us deep into the grand final. So that, for me, is probably one of the best victories and games that I've seen. It's probably really biased because it's still for my team, but no, loved it.
To each his own. I will openly say, when I did my favorite grand finals, I was a little bit of a homer, and it wasn't intentional, but it was because it was one of my favorite games. That was 2012 Hawthorn v Sydney, one of my favorite games I've ever watched. What an incredible game, back and forth, champagne footy, such a great match. You find a connection. It's hard to argue. And occasionally you'll get somebody, like I did an interview where they were a Carlton supporter and they picked the 2018 grand final between West Coast and Collingwood. There was a little bit of, because that West Coast beat Collingwood, So you had to laugh a little bit, but that I love that because you just never know what people are going to say. You never know what is that game that they're like, this is my favorite game I've ever seen. So, and footy is one of those you just never know. It could be a blowout, it could be a kick after the siren. You just never know. So, I this has been an awesome conversation, Brian, to hear your history and to be a Perth transfer over to Melbourne is probably always an interesting, but the fact that you still support your club, you're still right there for it. I think that is fantastic. So please keep it up. It's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, great to meet you, Coach. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode in my Aussie supporters series. More are coming. We're getting down to the end. Only a few more left. Keep an eye out. They're coming thick and fast. Brian, have a wonderful day. That will be it for us. We'll see you again sometime very soon.